Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Jeff Rock, and welcome to another D. Hilton Associates webinar. Today, we're going to be discussing variable pay incentive plans going into 2023 when we're looking at the executive level. We got a lot of great information. As always, this is going to be a good webinar. But first, let's just go through a couple of administrative items. Q&A section will come right to us, the panelists. The chat box, you can actually use the drop-down and ask a question to the entire group joining a presentation today. We'll also send out a survey. Let us know how we did, how you like the process, and if you have any other ideas you would like us to talk about or any discussion topics that you think are going to be relevant and something you think we might actually want to make a webinar for. So without further ado, we're going to try to keep this to about 45 minutes or so. So we'll have time for the end for questions as well as we might be able to get to your questions on the fly. So go ahead and bring those in. I'd like to introduce John Andrews. Thank you so much for joining us, John.
Good afternoon, Jeff. Good to see you.
Great to see you as well.
There's somebody else in the room.
Oh, really? We have to go through that as well?
Let's introduce him.
Joining us as well as Dr. Louder. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, John, I'm going to leave it on to you here.
Okay, well, it's great to have everybody back after a few weeks off, so to speak, and we've been in the throes of certifying balanced scorecards. Matt and I have been doing that, and this literally what we're talking about today is hot off the press. What we've seen is how 22 kind of rolled up for most people, and then what are we thinking for 23? There's a lot of unknowns. You know, recession rates, liquidity, and it's not as clear cut. So it's the most unusual year, but that doesn't mean we give up on trying to define what excellence is going to be. And that's the beauty of a balanced scorecard concept is, there's a financial consideration that's always on the table, but we're still making sure we have engaged members and that we have employees that are happy and that we're retaining our folks.
Fantastic.
So today, the agenda, if we look at the first slide here, is we still take the position that pay for performance is still best even in uncertain times because it's not what you pay, it's what you pay for. And if you don't pay, what you don't pay for is we're adding that to the second piece here. So we're going to talk about some of the things that we've seen there. Our second component is we'll see how CEOs fared on their scorecards and their incentive plans for 2022. And then we'll also kind of give you some behind the scenes stuff that we've seen relative to how people are looking at 23 and what metrics are coming to the forefront. And then we'll kind of finish with the holy grail is what's a good metric? You know, what am I going to pay for? Does it really move the business? It is the best. And in the old days, historical was all we did because it was a financial exercise. You know, is ROA better than it was last year, the average 5 years? And there's value in that, but you got to string together 5 economically similar years to make that work. So we kind of show you how we're kind of pushing through on some of those things.
Oh, yeah. And the last couple of years have been economically similar, haven't they?
I don't even know if that's a word or I just invented. But
I like it.
I don't think I've ever told you is my first econ class in college was with a communist professor. And our cookbook, our textbook.
You took a lot away from this.
all of the diagrams and all of the calculations had to talk about the downtrodden masses.
Of course.
So I'm still not recovered from that foundational work that I did. So
set you up for success. That's what
I had to overcome that. That's for sure. But anyway, so let me go to this kind of how the foundation argument that we're going to talk about today is. We don't want to be hostage. You go to a salary survey and it says, we're this big and we're supposed to pay that. That's just not good enough. And it's never been good enough. And it's almost the easy way out. You know, it says I'm supposed to pay you that. And then I'm a hostage if I don't pay you that. Mm-hmm. We believe pay for performance has been the ultimate tool for recruitment and retention. To say, you know, and that's very important semantically as we go through this. There's 2 terms that we need to define. Bonus means an after-the-fact award based on something arbitrary. Did Matt have a good year? What do you think? Was it better than last year? What did we give him last year? Oh, I don't even remember what we gave him last year. And you go around the table and pick a number, okay? An incentive is a prescribed formula up front that says, if you do this, then we will pay that. And I think that's a lot more, gives peace of mind more to who's writing the check and also who's receiving that check.
I think that's an extremely important point because especially in compensation, there's a lot of times that people are trying to define, okay, what's the difference between a bonus? What's the difference between incentive,
and we use
variable pay?
So many places we use them interchangeably, and we really need to break that habit.
Yep.
Because it's totally two different concepts.
Absolutely.
We've seen people get their resume dusted off because the bonus from year 2 to year 1 was $500 difference.
Mm-hmm.
They must not like me. Something's wrong. I better get out of here. But we gave you a bonus. Yeah, but I'm connecting the dots and they're not connecting. So
there's a downward trend, and I don't like that.
Exactly. So the first thing we look at is like, who do you want to compare against? Who do you want to define as a peer? And we could spend days on this. But when there's only 420 Craigens greater than $1 billion, we don't have a lot to choose from. And then you look at Craigens between 100 and $1 billion, and we have 1,000. So having good data is important, and we don't have a lot of it, so to speak. And even if it banks, I mean, there's 180 between 5 and 20 billion, and between 25 and 75 billion, there's 45. So we're starting to look like when you look at an SEC disclosure and they have 6 peers or 8 peers. So, the D. Hilton clients get the benefit of, we can have 100 or 150 type of organizations that kind of fit the bill. So what's interesting now is mortgage and commercial shops are hurting a little bit. Mm-hmm. They've made more people available to the marketplace. So just looking at a 2-year-old salary survey might be misleading to say what's today's market, okay? And if you're in the think we're held hostage by a mortgage department, then not so much today. And then I don't know if that's a politically correct word, but the fintechs and the high techs are figuring out they had 9,000 to 10,000 folks they didn't know what to do with, so they're gonna let them go. So the first thing is who's going to be a good comparison, and the trend today is much more of the executives want pay for performance. They're willing to put it at a variable. If I deliver, are you willing to reward? And I think that's a win-win, provided we have the right metrics. And the next thing is when you compare, what's the time frames? So in the last couple of webinars, we've talked about this idea of, the traditional thing is to pay the market and you lag. The market moves, you do a study, and then you react to that market. And then guess what? The day you pick a salary or an incentive target, it starts moving down the road. So we see a lot more credit unions in the $1 billion space looking at lead lags, looking at 6 months down the road, and there are 12 months trying to predict. So we're not always catching up. And it's not good or bad. It's just a philosophy that says if you tell your executives that, hey, we're going to do this type of thing, we're not always going to be reacting. We hope that we get some, goodwill out of that, so to speak. And
it still stays within alignment of your philosophy. You could target the 50th percentile. You're just targeting it 6 months from now.
Yeah, exactly. Same formula. It's just time frame. Yep. And the next thing is you've got a lot of buckets to play with, and you need to ask your executives what's important to them. If you're 45 and have 2 teenagers and they're getting ready for college, you need cash. And, and then if there's weddings, you need cash. And if you've got 2-year-olds, you need Costco diapers. I guess
you still need cash.
I guess hurt my argument here. Yeah. But the idea is, short-term, mid-term, and long-term really can be what you need to assess where you want to go and how you want to put plans together. And then finally, a lot of plans that have come up from sponsor groups are volunteers, and what they know in their workspace has been tenure-based. The longer you're there, the more you should get paid, which not necessarily the best argument for the members. Mm-hmm. The market says we have to pay X, so we got to pay X. That's the hostage situation. I don't think that's important. Are the most credible way to say that's why we're paying you this. We'd pay you less if we could, but the salary survey says we have to. Yeah. So that's why the performance is going to be the ultimate prize for recruitment and retention. I think both parties have skin in the game, and they're able to look at, the year going forward and be real productive and motivational in what we pay and sometimes what we don't pay. So we kept the arrows. This is on purpose. This isn't a mistake. This was 2:00 in the morning. I said, it would be nice to have some arrows drawn here.
It's going to be a good idea for those arrows.
So on the right, what we did is we were doing a recent study, and we're looking at community banks between 25 and 75 billion. and we went to their SEC report disclosures, and the DEF 14A is where they have to show their shareholders pay philosophy, what they pay their folks, how their long-term incentive plans, their SERPs, and those types of things are done. And so this was really, in this peer group, about 25 that we looked at. This is Bank of Oklahoma, which is public knowledge, but look at the priorities there. So, it's mom pie and apple. Was it mom, apple pie, and Chevrolet? It's we need some patriotic music as we read this. But number one is we want to be above peers. Then we want to link performance. Then we want to look at operations. Then we want to look at competition relative peers. And then we want to align with exec interest with shareholders. But the theme there is what? Make money, grow a stock price. And it's in that order on purpose. That's not just alphabetical or something like that. But look what we do in a typical credit union pay philosophy for large credit unions. It's alignment first. And so that's why the arrow goes from the top. Our, credit union 1 to bank number 5 is simply because I think it sends the right message.
Absolutely.
And then we want to do our attract and retain. We want to motivate, and then we differentiate based on the individual team performance. Means it's not an entitlement. And then finally, if we do have to look at some plans, make sure it's tax effective for the executive, but it's not what we lead with.
Yeah.
So that's just an example of, I think, as we get bigger and we're going to have more scrutiny paid on overall compensation packages, and they'll be bigger as the industry gets bigger. We need to start these practices now. It's not what you pay, it's what you pay for and why you pay what you pay. Okay? So right now in the for-profit world, you have to have some type of attestation that says, it's not the good old boy network. All my buddies on the board, and they're going to give me a big raise and give me lots of stock. So, they talk about how they're independent. They have publicly disclosed that there's transparency in how they make these decisions. Where they do or not, to what degree is another question, but that's what they publicly say. And so on the left is something that we like to use for our clients. It's like an attestation. Where did it come from? It comes from the goal of being transparent. So look at that list. So, a board is elected by the membership. The directors are, whether they're paid or unpaid, they volunteer their time, to make sure they're making sure we have the best people in those top chairs at those seats. Our number one responsibility as a board member in a governance model is to attract and identify and retain those people. This is not the place to save $5,000. Mm-hmm. This is the place to make sure we have the best people running this for our membership. We use outside third parties to gather data. We're not related to the president because in some banks, it's a family-run business, and Aunt Myrtle is in charge of compensation. And Aunt Myrtle, if you give me $300,000, I'll give you $300,000. It'll be great. There's no relationship to the CEO. And then finally, we have outside people looking at our stuff to make sure that there aren't shenanigans, so to speak. So again, we don't have to do this, but we encourage you to do that because it's a strongly transparent type of position to take. So Matt and I have been working with over 50 credit unions, and we've been tapped in with our other clients on what we've seen. So in 22, Matt, walk us through some of the things that you've seen.
So just looking at the target incentive plans that we had, right about 50% of the credit unions met or exceeded the target. And then if you compare just the percentage payout, about the average was, which makes sense. If 50% were meeting or exceeding their target, about 100% of the target was on average what a credit union CEO was suggested for their payout in 2022.
So in 21, we were 90 to 95% of target. And, so we did see some better years.
And the one driver that many credit unions use because of its importance is the ROA. And 2022 was much better for ROA than many of the credit unions, actually 85% than they thought they were going to be. So they set their goal and achieved or beat that goal 85% in 2022. So when you look at that, that's just one driver, and it's a balanced scorecard. So many of the other drivers did have challenges, which is listed below, and that's why the overall average wasn't way above target.
Yeah. So, and and our thinking is why ROA is typically a highly weighted driver and on a lot of plans. It's the revenue piece. It says we made this and we want to share that. So that's why it's there. What I think is interesting, it was a lot of commonality in the challenges that we saw. So if you look at that list at the lower part of the slide there, once the rates broke out in third quarter, mortgage revenue fell off. So if you were counting on mortgage to be a key driver of ROA, it wasn't there. Liquidity is still a challenge, and it became really expensive to borrow. So that was eating into some of our ratios. And meanwhile, on the other side, people still trusted us. The brands are good. The money was coming in. Even though people are paying down their credit cards, we're still really, really trying to see what to do with deposits. But a big one on ROA was allowance for loan loss. In 21, a lot of credit unions, I'm not an accountant, but appeared to be ultra conservative and over allowed. And so once that wasn't playing out and they felt pretty safe, they moved that money back into 22, and the ROAs were good. So one of the things I always think we tell our clients is look at your ROA like with and without some of those extraordinary accounting moves to see what the true run rate was for operation. And some people it was really good, and some people said it was really almost like a 2-year number because of what they did for the allowance. One of the metrics that really was lagging across the country, I can't just say it's one part of the region, was new member growth. And I just think people hunkered down and they kept their relationships and they didn't venture out to other types of things and financial institutions. And, we saw people not score as high in that area. If you did, awesome. But if you didn't, that was probably more the rule than the exception. And then finally, what we're seeing is members are becoming tougher critics. It's not just a blind allegiance that we're a credit union, we're great. We still need to walk the walk. So as credit unions do expand to new pieces of geography or to expand their field of membership definitions, we can't just think it's a given that the brand is, spotless. And, I hate to say it, but when you read your Yelp reviews and you go, oh my gosh, that really happened? You go, yeah, maybe it did. Now, it might be one case out of a million, but it's still something to look at. So as we go forward, when we look at net promoter score and things, financial institutions always been like high 40s, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
That's what we kind of see a lot in banks.
Yeah. And then credit unions, mid to high 60s?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, so, and if you look at people that have been with you less than 3 years, a member, usually that's a not the same number as your overall number. If you look at certain new locations, sometimes that's a number that to look at. So these are things that kind of brought down overall scores, but some of the challenges that we have to face going into 23 as well. So 2 big things that came out of this. We see the emergence of kind of a midterm plan coming out. So people have done a good job, and Debbie and Brian in our last webinar talked about SERPs and supplemental retirement plans to cover the entire career, and actually doing some hybrid plans with multiple distributions is seeing what executives really resonate with. But we're also seeing another layer, which means 3 to 5 year types of cash plans for pure retention. As we have a lot of turnover and we have slow demand, if I can make somebody stay 1 year longer through a cash retention, that's a win. So again, we used to do these a lot more before SERPs were really prevalent in the industry, but now it's an and, not an or. And the other thing we've seen staff-wide, which is very interesting, is it kind of happens in 10-year cycles. So I'm starting my 4th cycle, I guess. Ouch. But, it's centralized versus decentralized. So when I started, we were, everybody, all for one, one for all. And then it was, let's pay salespeople and, different than service people. Then it was all for one. And then it was, maybe do something for mortgages and wealth management, maybe do something for front of the house. But last 3 or 4 years, we've come back to gain share type plans because of omni-channel delivery. So what happens is, a member starts here, looks online, uses something on their phone, goes, talks to a person in the contact center, and ends up signing a piece of paper over there. And then I've got 5 people wanting credit for the same
Everybody's got their hand out at that point. I touched that account.
Yeah. And so what we've seen is a lot of CEOs just saying, in the spirit of we have to do really good at these handoffs as we look at these rewards and these programs as a team. And we're seeing that come back. So when we look at metrics, the easy stuff is not the right stuff. And some of the easy stuff can be like activity-based. So at the ground level, it's like, we did 1,000 hours of training, or we did 400 hours of volunteering, or we bought 13, sold 13 mortgages. And that's kind of the means to an end. But we also got to get rid of the 30,000 foot view, which means we want to be 5 billion, in 5 years, or we want 100% of our members to be, we want to be their PFI. Both of those are lofty, not reasonable, and they sound good. And, a couple of people have written books about, the big audacious goals and dream big, or go home, those types of things. But really somewhere in the middle is more pragmatic. And that's what I want to show you today is how we're looking at those. So what do you measure? Four concepts. When you look at, if you start with a blank sheet of paper, are you comparing what you have now? Think of 4 different things. Efficiency. Am I getting a return on those investments? Whether it's through our core software to do better targeting of promotions, or identifying opportunities, or looking at product bundles, and I can price them appropriately. What can we do to get more out of our technology? The second one is outcomes. Simply mean this is what we invested in, and here was the result. Quality, and in banking, financial services, and credit unions, obviously, error rates, quality control is, we were 99% accurate except for yours, Jeff. Yeah. So we apologize for that.
Of course, the most important one to me, I see how it is.
But you see a lot of high-performing credit unions, they do have quality assurance types of programs built into their value chain. And then the projects. And that's probably the most interesting one to me, because as we ask executive teams to do innovation, to think about what's coming down the pipe, sometimes it become milestone driven. On March, we're going to look at 3 vendors, and in June, we're going to pick one, and then we're going to go visit people. So we hear about all those things, and it gets us to an end, but we got to have a date and go live. And then the next step that a lot of people don't take is, what's the impact of that move? If we have a new credit card, if we have a new location, what is my return on that, and how fast is it going to happen? That's what we need to get to. So if they don't, if you're measuring anything that don't fall in these 4 categories, the question is, it might be valid, but at least this gives you a framework to say, you don't overweight one area more than the other, or it gives you a way to frame it so you can actually measure it.
Yeah, and there's your fundamentals essentially, and that's exactly what gets measured gets done kind of adage.
Yeah, and the thing that we like to do is weight criteria, our metrics. Yeah. So if in performance management, when we have neat and tidy desk as a metric, and then loan production as a second goal, you're great at a neat and tidy desk, and you really stink at the loans. Good plus bad equals middle. It's a decent race. Mm-hmm. But if we say neat and tidy desk is a 10% weight and loan production is 90, I think I've set the priorities for you.
Yeah. Return on investment, return on compensation, always good to weigh.
Yeah. So this is where we talk about, and I think people that have strategic planning as a metric or projects, this is the holy grail. Executives, if you're out there and you're trying to do milestone communication, very important, but it's activities. Paint that picture for the board of when it hits and how's it going to impact financials, production, member satisfaction. I think you got more value there. So we get asked at least once a day, what are the metrics out there? And so they're not right or wrong. There's only 2 that are wrong, I guess we can say. And that really comes from regulators. And the 2, as we understand it, you can't use loan growth because we don't want to encourage risk-taking, which totally get that. But there's other ways to measure your loan effectiveness without saying we want 10% more loans. And the second thing is camel rating. That's not for public knowledge or information, and so we can't use that. But the camel has a lot of great ratios that actually measure our success to varying degrees. But here's some things that we've seen kind of emerge, and just wanted to share those with you. So if you'd like, we've got definitions, but just because we have a 45-minute program today, I didn't want to go through every definition. But if anything's intriguing, give us a call and we'll kind of walk you through if it makes sense for you guys. The financial metrics, you'll see there. The innovations, I love a plan that looks at 3 dimensions. Innovation for the future, how we did today, and then historically, are we walking the walk of the mission of where we want to be? So, when we look at growth, it's not just members. It could be by product. It could be by location. It could be specific, to a specific demographic within the employee. I feel like I'm calling on my kids, right?
Yeah. Chris, Mike, Adam, Bob, whoever you are, come over here.
Yes. Yeah, I think you know what I mean. But the idea isn't just an overall number. We can be really, really honing in on things that are going to move the needle. And it's a very important question. To me, the heavy lifting of any variable pay or incentive plan is done in strategic planning. Mm-hmm. You can do that and then not leverage that into an actual metric document.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you can't just be talking about all this great, flowery, wonderful stuff, how it's going to be in the future, but we got to put skin in the game, and we got to put some metrics around it. So here's some things that we've seen.
And the other interesting point of this, because obviously the next follow-up question is, okay, which one of these do you weight more than the other?
Yeah.
And there's no, golden bullet or silver bullet in that case. It is based off of strategic initiatives, where you're actually going to drive the organization, what's important for you in the upcoming year. That's how you start weighing those balancing. That's where you put that into effect.
Yeah. And then, the second part of what you're talking about too is the calibration. Mm-hmm. Plus or minus 10% for every metric doesn't work. It really has to be case by case of where you are. So if you've always grown 5% and you want 5% next year, I have very little runway for being below 5% because you demonstrate it, unless there's something really materially different in your business operation. But if you've always done 5 and you want 10, I said, well, maybe that's pretty ambitious. Let's give you a little runway to be above 5. Mm-hmm. And not make it a cliff. Yeah. But the biggest thing is historical's got value, but it doesn't necessarily jive into an automatic calibration for the year in question. Yeah, is how I'd say.
It goes back to what 8 is great kind of thing. Oh, yeah. We chose 8 because it rhymed with great, so we decided to put that metric in.
Yeah, those Wells Fargo are still trying to return that money. The government's still asking them to we need a little bit more. We found out some more, a little bit more. We'll get there. And then when it comes to member feedback, I mean, Matt, we've seen so many different companies and third-party vendors have tools, and credit unions develop their own. There's a lot of information out there on this. The first question is, what do we want to measure? And to me, one of the things that is not as meaningful as an overall satisfaction number. Right. An overall net promoter score. What's your thinking on that?
So I like when we kind of make it more targeted towards what the goals are and the initiatives of the institution. So you talked about it a little bit before, but one of my favorite ones is the new member kind of satisfaction. Yeah. Or even net promoter score for the new members. We've seen with lots of research that is they're often very different in their opinion of the institution, and as a long-term goal, they are really maybe even more important. The people that have been around are already kind of have their opinion of the credit union, but you really want to know what the new members are thinking. So.
And along those lines, like if you made a huge push into digital delivery, but you're measuring overall success, it doesn't jive.
Right. Yeah.
Because I guess technically I need to ask the question, what of the members that use the digital channel exclusively or frequently, what is that result? That's going to give me more feedback than just if 20 or 30% of my membership doesn't use the channel.
Exactly. Again, that's to me when we see those when they're targeting to some kind of initiative that we put all this effort here, or sometimes where this is where we've seen a drop in satisfaction. Let's kind of move the eye to this kind of initiative, and it keeps the CEOs focused on it as well.
I mean, this might be a little bit too ground level, but when it comes down to Net Promoter Score, I always look at like the lender. If they follow the rules and regulations, the policy and procedure, and decide to deny a loan to somebody or a member or something along that line, they're going to submit a negative Net Promoter Score because of that. And being dinged for that kind of situation might be difficult.
People delinquent on their loans sometimes don't give you nice reviews either.
Yeah. There you go. So how do you weigh that very heavily? There's some cases in which case that NPS score may not be telling the whole story. It might be because you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. You've performed admirably, but they didn't like that because it was negative to them.
Let me give you a great example of that in another industry, in healthcare, hospitals. I think it's one of the toughest things to do. We'll do a patient satisfaction study. I'm saying we, like I do them, but
yeah, we will. We'll get on that next. That's what we do on the weekends, right?
So the management sends a survey out to patients. Let's just call it, having a baby. So in there, we're going to deliver a baby, and mom needs to stay 3 days instead of 2 days, but the insurance company says mom can only stay 2 days. So you're saying, please give us a high ranking on our survey for satisfaction. But now we love you, but you got to leave.
You got to go.
So what's happening is you've got these two forces conflicting. They know what they need to deliver service, yet they're not allowed to deliver that in all cases. Yeah. So when we get to Net Promoter Score, if you just change your computer and you go, oh, let's don't do a member survey right now. It's real live. I mean, it's not so bad to have a baseline of if it did drop. So consider the environment when you do surveys. The one that I think is getting a little traction is that effort score. If you look back on the screen, you'll call it customer effort score. How hard or how easy was it to do business with? Because there's some interesting data that the correlation, the easier it is to do business, people will come back and say good things about you. And again, this last one on bounce rate, if you put a ton of money into your contact center, or you put a ton of money into your, digital delivery, we want people sticking and spending time there. And so, get a return on your investment by using those types of things. Now, is it a major metric for a CEO scorecard? It could be if enough money was spent, but sometimes it's really good at the C-suite level when they're doing tactical execution to have that type of measure or metric at that level.
But also maybe depending on the institution too, where if your institution already has high NPS scores, sometimes they can drop the weight on it and move it more to a monitoring kind of metric. So refocus our attention onto other areas in the balanced scorecard.
Yeah, we've got that thing knocked out. Let's keep an eye on it, but let's not weight it as heavily.
Yeah.
Well, that's take that a step further and say, you have 96% satisfied of your membership. Forget about how it was done, but you got that number. As a volunteer, you can't say, let's go for 97. Because you can because usually a 95 or 96 number is plus or minus 5% confidence level, which means you're pretty perfect on that score. So we won't debate the methodology of how it was selected, but if you're dealt with that, sometimes more is not better. Sometimes it's maintenance. In our plans, what we like to do, if it's a monitoring metric, is, as Matt said, 5 or 10% weight. Don't make it a driver, but it's in the background.
Yeah.
We don't want to lose that position, and we want to award or recognize that position, but it's not driving the behavior. Let's spend money or make initiatives in other places. Okay. Now you'll see on our chart, number one metric is going to be CEO evaluations, and it's not what gets done; it's how it's done. And by having that in your incentive plans, it gives the board the ultimate say-so that we're delivering on the vision. So you can break down the goals and objectives any way you want, CEO, but it's all got to roll back into a position that we not only did we get what we wanted or asked for, but we liked how it was done.
Yeah. Oh, you hit your budget, but you
Yeah.
did that by firing half the staff.
Or selling
Not
off.
exactly how we want to accomplish that.
Well, yeah. And, like reducing expenses. Okay, well, great, but don't let member satisfaction drop,
Mhm.
those types of things. So we really think it jives with governance by giving the board the ability to look at the CEO, the how it was done. It also gives you a chance to impress upon the team that innovation has to be on the plate. Oh, we're so busy. We're putting out fires. We just finished a merger. We've got integration. We got to take the year off because we've got to get everybody, get their breath back before we push again. And every one of your competitors is not taking that position. So what are we doing to innovate? And making sure that we're putting that at top of mind. And then finally, are we really utilizing the brain power, the resources, and whether it's technology or people or whatever. So that's why the evaluation can be a really good tool to have in this. Not what, but how.
So when we're looking at back to the kind of ROA driver, because it's really important to many different credit unions, what we saw was a big shift in the expectations of ROA in 2023 versus what they just saw in 2022. And so 81% of the credit unions are actually dropping their goal in their budget relative to 2022 for 2023. So, and on average, it's a drop of about 12 basis points. So it's a kind of there's many credit unions out there expecting something's coming where ROA is going to go down. And this brings us back to the point of where historical benchmarking may be misleading this year. So
It's the most natural question to ask. Well, what did we do last year? And why aren't we going to do more than last year?
right.
Well, there's a lot of things that go in that decision. So when I say the heavy lifting's done at strategic planning, that's when you get the first taste of we're building a new building, we're doing different geography, we're going to retool our core software. All of those things go into this. With the rates, with margins, it's not the same playing field, but it's the most logical thing to do, right?
Mhm.
And we have a lot of clients that have been with their credit unions more than 20 years were taught 1.0 ROA is the standard, and maybe it was. Maybe it shouldn't have been ever, depending on if we were really looking at what we need to do to be successful. But that was really, really eye-opening to me is how consistent the message was of 23 has got a lot of unknowns. And one of the things, I actually answered the question last night of, well, we start with a budget and then maybe by the middle of the year, something catastrophic happens to the good or to the bad. We think that you should be looking at this every month. We think any type of incentive scorecard or metric concept, that should be kind of the basis of the president's report every month, how we're doing in these different areas. Some credit unions do have a formal process at mid-year to readjust. And I think it's a good practice. Let's be realistic and work in shorter timeframes, because we'll have some people that take the position as, deal's a deal. We agreed to this in January. We're not going to change anything. You got to just deal with what you're dealt. Hello, Mr. COVID. Yeah, we all factored in that,
Planned for that and well in advance.
Yeah. But, some people did a better job with their, their business resumption and disaster recovery than others. That's good. But we always want to be really pragmatic with this. So, we kind of end the program today of saying, look at this more than once a year and be willing to modify when you hear good business case studies for making the modifications. I think would be really valuable and meaningful to your program. So, in recapping today, we kind of wanted to tell you what we saw for 13, what we saw for the top metrics. There's one slide I think I popped it. Can I go back? Y'all can fix this. If it's on this one. Yes.
Oh, you flew right by it. There
Yeah.
you go.
I was in
You were
Rosewood.
excited.
Well, what Matt was talking about. So the payoff, guys, is what some of you came for, actually, was every year we've done this for about 10 years, and we've looked at the market, and we've polled our clients and various credit unions to say, what is going to be the key thing? So in the balanced scorecard, 4 quadrants, you got safety and soundness, the owner, what you do for your member or your customer base within that membership. What are you doing for monitoring risk and doing strategic planning to address those risks? And then finally, governance, how we work together. So you look at 23, here's the top 15 metrics that we're seeing right now.
And board evaluation, as you mentioned earlier, way on top.
Right. So we get, how we do things. Strategic plan gets us more into innovation and execution of that strategic plan. Then we get into our financial metrics, and then we get into net promoter scores and member satisfactions. The reason we split out member sat and net promoter score because it is 2 unique concepts. So net promoter score is that one, like, would you refer your friends and family? Whereas member satisfaction can be a little deeper into products and relationship based on that, not just one question. I think the holy grail was net promoter score because it was an easy thing, but life's not that easy.
Crazy talk. Things that are worth doing are hard, John. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, Jeff, that's what I'm saying. So we had one question that came up. Speaking of net promoter score, the question is: Would you eliminate scores relating to rates on the net promoter score? And we go, absolutely. I think it's a valuable concept. I mean, you're either known as a place with great rates or you're not, and it's an ALM decision whether to agree. I don't know any in 35 plus years done strategic planning facilitations where Craig says we want to be the best rate in town, because you'll never be the best rate in town because you'll be it for like 1 second, and then somebody else bigger than you will say, okay, I can beat or match that rate. So we want to be competitive. We want to be known as competitive. So I'd much rather get at questions or member feedback on, are we known as a place that has fair rates and that we are, in the market, so to speak, but not the best. And, a credit union cannot be all things to all people. So of those folks that are really rate driven or savings driven, and if that's not part of our core mission, then there might be a disconnect. So as long as we can break down the segments, I think you have more value in that score. And then if it is if our net savers are not thinking it's a great NPS location, then is that okay, or do we want to address it? Yeah. So at least identify it, but maybe not for the scorecard when it counts to rewards.
Yeah. In some cases, it might strategically make sense. So yeah, you can certainly weigh that a little bit differently.
And if it's not a priority,
there you go.
Then we can measure all you want.
Absolutely.
And that's another thing on Net Promoter Score, guys, is there's transactional surveys and there's relationship. And what we're talking about is relationship is more valuable at the senior level. Transactions are great, like secret shopper programs. Yeah. Great training tools, coaching tools for our lower levels. But for CEOs, I don't think we secret shop them.
No, not too often.
So...
All right. A couple more minutes for any additional questions. Get an opportunity to get those in now. Looks like we got one more, John.
Yeah, I'll give you one more question. There was a question on, net worth or capital still so high. What we're saying is you manage it to your ALM position. So most people say we want a position not to go lower than, but it's one of those things Matt talked about a monitoring metric. It shouldn't be a driver. So, yeah, people still have it in the plan because we want to improve safety and soundness. When you drop below 7%, you lose your autonomy. So, I mean, that's an ultimate floor. But if 10% or 8%, you're just managing the business and being where you want to make your investments relative to knowing that you want to have a position. So that's what we meant by that. Threshold is probably the best word I can use on that. I actually have had... in 35 years, maybe 5 clients that have penalized a CEO for having too much capital.
Oh, not enough risk using that kind of stuff?
Well, they're saying we're not giving it back to the member. Maybe more needs to be plowed into rates or into services. So they say we want to keep it within a range. That's some nuance to that, but it's an interesting concept. It sends a message to what? More is not better for this metric. Mm-hmm. But I've had a few people actually walk the walk and penalize somebody for that. But as a consultant, I'd love to hear that, right?
Yeah,
I could help him spend the money, I guess. But,
I got ideas.
I have some ideas, yeah. But anyway, that's why it's still there, because I think it's a top of mind for everybody because it's on your exams.
There you go.
Okay.
All right, guys, thank you so much for the opportunity. We do sincerely appreciate it. Of course, this webinar has been recorded. We'll have this posted on our website in about 3 to 5 business days. Give us a couple of days to get that up there. Again, also, you can find all the previous webinars there as well. You'll also receive a follow-up email with the slide deck that we went through today, so be on the lookout for that. That'll come in a couple days as well. It doesn't look like we have any more questions at the time, so I think we're good to go. John, thank you so much for spending the time.
Thank you.
Really do appreciate it. Dr. Louder, thank you so much for joining us. Looking forward to seeing you again on a couple more.
Yeah.
And our just give everybody a heads up. Our next April webinar is going to be talking about performance management and how we deliver pay through performance management concepts for staff. So it's going to be more of a staff level concept on. We're seeing employees in all industries wanting more frequent rewards and recognition. So the downside to that is what? Appraisals and bureaucracy.
Administrative.
So we're going to show you some techniques that we've seen to how to, look at a modified appraisal concept so we can get performance management to be manageable as a good coaching tool and to get hands into our employees a little bit more frequently. Not necessarily more money, but just more frequently. So that's coming up in April.
Fantastic. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining. We look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye-bye.